Do you remember the first time you heard the phrase, love your neighbor? Maybe this is the first time you heard it. If so, what kind of thoughts and feelings come to you when you hear it? Love your neighbor. Take just a moment to let those thoughts and feelings come back to you. When I first heard this gospel lesson, I was 13 years old, and I was sitting in the Penn Yan First Baptist Church because I happened to be brought up Baptist. And when I heard the pastor say, love your neighbor, I found myself focusing on Emma, my 15-year-old neighbor, who happened to be very attractive. And I thought, well, this would be a wonderful opportunity if only I could fulfill it. It wasn't long after that Emma's family was forced to move out of that house. They were renting it, and the owner decided that he was going to move into it. So as it turned out, this crabby old man moved next door. It wasn't too long after that the kids in the neighborhood were told rather directly, don't step on my property. That's what the man said, and he once yelled at us, and then yelled at us again that if we stepped on his property, we would be arrested. Well, to say the least, my friends in the neighborhood and I were not the least bit interested in loving him. Then one day, he started to prepare to paint his house. And I can remember my neighborhood friends thinking of ways that we could make the task more difficult for him. But before we had the chance to do any of that, one day my father got out his ladder and tools and went over and helped this guy scrape the house in preparation for painting. As I look back on that day, after 70 years of reflection, I can't help but acknowledge that my father came a lot closer to loving our neighbor than I did. Love is messy sometimes. It doesn't come all wrapped up in a neat little package. Part of the problem is that whenever we talk about falling in love, the physical attraction seems more specific and appealing. But soon we learn that entering into a love relationship can be very complicated and very unpredictable. Jesus demonstrated that his love for us was primarily an act of self-giving instead of one seeking personal satisfaction for himself. But that has not kept us from hoping for our own satisfactions when we enter into a relationship, especially when we fall in love. I can remember the day that I met my future wife, Phyllis, for the first time. Now, most of you here have never met Phyllis, and there's a reason for that, because after being appointed to 7 different churches before I came here, she was at the point where she didn't want to meet the whole new family of supporters anymore. And so she stayed in Liverpool and worshiped there and never came here. But Phyllis, nonetheless, was an interesting person in my life early on. She was a freshman at Syracuse University when I first met her, and she was the roommate of a friend that I had had in high school, Helen. And so I went to visit Helen, and while we were visiting, she said, I want to have you meet my roommate. Wait here. So I waited there at the bottom of the stairs, and when the door opened and I saw Phyllis for the first time, I said to myself, this young woman is going to be my wife. Yeah, I said that. I really did. Well, after reflecting on that experience over the duration of my life, I have come to believe that God had a hand in getting me to think about marrying Phyllis. At the time, I wasn't even considering going into the ministry. Also, at that time, I wasn't aware that she was the daughter of a Methodist pastor. I'm also aware that God can be very pushy when it comes to helping people follow a path that God believes is right for us. You understand that? How God pushes us in ways that we don't necessarily want to go in the first place? Well, in today's scripture reading, it points out very clearly that there are amazing things in life that we fail to understand. One of those is how a man loves a woman. And when we talk about making love to a marriage partner, we're dealing with sharing pleasures. But loving marriage partners expects a great deal more than just that. For instance, when Phyllis and I had been married for about 10 years, alcohol entered our lives. Before that time, both of us had grown up with the expectation that alcohol should be avoided completely. But then I had some friends who invited me to have some wine with lunch, and we did that quite often, and I got to the point where I enjoyed it. And I couldn't see any problem with it. So, soon after that, when Phyllis and I went out to lunch, I invited her to have some wine with me. And before long, one of the things that we discovered was that it helped us to share our thoughts with one another more easily. That was very satisfying for a while. But after a number of years, we both added drinks of heavier alcohol. And instead of opening our lives to one another, it shut the relationship down considerably. I'm now aware that I'm an alcoholic. And I think that she may have been also. For her, the drinking amplified dramatically a physical problem that eventually took her life. At the end of one summer, about 20 years ago, she went to the doctor to investigate a very painful sore throat. What she learned was that she had esophageal cancer. And that required immediate surgery. After a week in the hospital, she came home. But she couldn't take care of herself. In fact, she could barely breathe. She couldn't eat except the fluids that I put down the tubes that were in her throat. During that time, when she couldn't talk, she had a pad and pencil beside her all the time because she wanted to at least express some of her thoughts. And on the first night when she was home, I started to repeat my habit of fixing a drink of alcohol. And when I did, she handed me a note that stated clearly, "I depend on you." Well, then I stopped drinking. I focused all of my time and energy on taking care of her, which required my attention at least once every hour, 24 hours a day. Now as I look back on that period of time in my life, it was better than any other time in our lives together. Sometimes love is about doing things crazy with all the energy and passion that you've got. I don't recommend that any of you reach for such difficult circumstances. But I do recommend that you keep yourselves open to the possibilities for facing the deeper demands of love. I also encourage you to be aware that God is involved in our everyday efforts to help us respond to his call for us to love one another. One last thought. Phyllis and I had the habit of taking a final boat ride around the Tisco Lake at the end of each summer. It was always a slow ride, and during each ride we played a tape of music pieces that our daughter had recorded and put on a tape for us. So at the end of that first summer after Phyllis died, I decided I was going to take that trip anyway. So I got into the boat and I put on the tape. And as the tape started to play, a beautiful little butterfly came and sat down in her seat. Well, I thought at first this simply was an amazing experience. I figured before very long that butterfly would be leaving. But as I drove around the lake, which took me an hour, the butterfly remained on the seat until the music ended, which happened to be the same time when we were pulling into the dock. And so I found myself saying, "I love you," and she flew away. Was this an act of God letting me know how powerful and permanent our acts of love can be? I believe it was. And I'm deeply grateful that our partnership with God in love has extraordinary ways of enriching our daily lives. Thanks be to God. Amen.